Okay, so I get the honor of introducing a learned member of our chapter. I went to his retirement and they passed out these badges that says, "I know Bob." Fantastic. And I should have kept mine. I didn't, Bob, but I didn't really know Bob until I got to reading about his bio. He's not only a master gardener, but he's a master naturalist and member of this chapter, of course. He's a lecturer and writer, and any of you who live in the woodlands have seen some of his many articles that he's written, literally hundreds of articles, also on the internet, both in print and online. He served on an ad hoc committee that developed a water conservation strategy for the woodlands. All right, and then for 15 years he managed implementing that, and the result is the woodlands went from 200 plus gallons a day per person to 91. That's a striking change over a huge breadth of people, and a huge positive environmental impact. As a result, his department has received the Texas Water Development Award for advances in water conservation. He's also Texas Master Gardener of the Year, Water Conservation Leader of the Year, and the Gulf Coast Water Conservation from the Gulf Coast Water Conservation Group, and Educator of the Year from the Montgomery County Master Gardener. So if all of you are feeling like underachievers, he also is recently retired to Willis with his wife, with Denise. He's gardens, he writes, he lectures like he will tonight, and he is going to apparently develop the website, Gulf Coast Gardening, that will be live at the end of this month, correct?
Yeah.
So,
he's also curmudgeon of the year. So.
is that the Bah Humbug Award? All right, so Bob, let me see if I can get you started in the right spot. And let me share your screen. One we want to share. All right, I think, take it away, Bob.
I don't know who wrote that.
Some of it, but you want 100 copies of it, right?
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's
Exactly.
amazing. The end of the hour.
I'm not gonna tell that joke I told last week because most of you have heard it, so.
Well, I haven't heard it, go ahead.
I haven't either, Bob.
2. 3, okay. All right, well, you know, I got to doing some investigations about soil because I really like the idea of good soil. I'm an organic gardener. And so I started looking at it in the light of native plants and what's the relationship of soil and native plants. And I found some interesting things. First of all, the bacteria that live in the soil, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. The bacteria that lives in the soil was actually the parent of all the plants we have, all the plants. They came from the bacteria that lived in fact, 300 million years ago, that those same bacteria, well, not the same ones, but progenitors, yeah, of them were in the soil. And there is an intricate relationship between all of these things. And the first thing I want to do is talk about the intricate relationships. And then I want to talk about some new scientific discoveries that are coming about that just blow my mind. So there's really some interesting things, if I can get this thing.
Sometimes it had a lag, I found out.
Oh, I got to turn it on, I think. Yeah, how do you turn it on?
On the side. pointed at the computer.
It still doesn't work. See, oh,
I don't think it'll work on that screen.
It was working.
Is it?
No, it's-
Oh, okay.
The Bluetooth might be.
They're all mess with it in advance so you
Okay.
get to go.
some of the stuff I've been studying is our native arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, which is, they've done some really advanced research on it, particularly in Australia and China. But there are people doing it today too. You and I talked about this young lady who's doing it with red oaks, right? And that may be a possibility of getting her for a speaker one time. I think that would be really good because I'm just scratching the surface of it, but there's a whole lot of stuff that we can learn. There we go. Okay, I want to talk about what's going on here in soil. Some of you have heard some of this stuff. Soil is made up of 5 ingredients: minerals, organic matter, living organisms, gases, and water. Now, eliminate any one of these and we no longer have soil. Okay, so we have dirt. That's the difference. So minerals, of course, the dirt in the soil, the dirt, that's what it is just crumbled rock and in very fine form. But it has all the minerals, or most of the minerals, and that plants need. But the plants can't get them. They can't take them out of this. So here are some of the other minerals that they need, and these are macronutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That's the NPK on your fertilizer bags, which I hope you're buying organic fertilizer. And then secondary macronutrients: magnesium, sulfur, calcium, and some micronutrients: boron, iron, manganese, copper, zinc, molybdenum, and chlorine. The important thing is most of these already exist in those little tiny rock fragments that we call dirt. Okay? And the problem is that plants can't get to those things. They can't take it. Okay? There must be an intermediate entity to allow them to take it. Now, there is even another element in all of that. I'll try to explain that to you in a minute. So let's just talk about nitrogen, for instance. Nitrogen provides plants with energy. It's needed for photosynthesis. It's needed for chlorophyll production. It promotes cell growth. And this is a nitrogen deficiency here. So the plants become slow, the growth, the leaves fall off. Now we're talking about phosphorus. Energy transfer, photosynthesis again. It transforms sugars and starches, nutrient movement within the plant, transfer of genetic characteristics. And those are very important things. And I'm going to tie all this in a minute. Potassium is needed for the movement of water in the stems and of the plant, nutrients, carbohydrates, and it also helps maintain that normal level of fluid that actually holds the stems up straight, holds the leaves in their proper place. Now let's talk about nitrogen sources. There are only a few ways. Plants can't take in nitrogen from the air, although nitrogen's everywhere. We have plenty of nitrogen on this planet, but they can't take it in through their leaves. They must take it in through their roots. They must. So there are only 4 ways that plants can obtain oxygen. Nitrogen fixation from free live bacteria in the soil. Okay? That's one way. In other words, the bacteria will take the nitrogen out of the soil and actually transform it in a way that can be taken in by the plants. Bacteria living symbiotically in the new nodules on legumes, that's beans. They say, beans, leave your beans in, they fix nitrogen.
Can they do it from the nitrogen, elemental nitrogen?
In the soil, yeah.
Okay,
And here's the other thing, nitrogen infused rain.
nitrate.
Yeah, they're right, exactly. Because with high heat will infuse H2O molecule with an atom of nitrogen. So that would be
Nitrous oxide.
nitrous oxide, yes. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, so. And the fourth is from fertilizer. So you put the fertilizer on, the fertilizer has to go down in the soil, and the bacteria fixes that. Soil water is necessary. That's what the plant nutrients are assimilated by. What happens is the bacteria uses the water to dissolve the minerals that then are made available to the plants. It's a complex structure because we don't think about that. Plants take in, we take in food to create energy. Plants take in energy to create food. It's a completely different thing. But the stomach of a plant, our stomach is here, and our gut has microbes in it. The stomach of a plant is actually the soil. The soil is the stomach of the plant, unless it's one of those bug-eating plants. Then it's different. Organic matter. I want to talk about organic matter for a minute. Organic matter in the soil is residue and living microbes. So here's some residue. Active soil, organic matter also is referred to as detritus. I called it detritus until a school teacher came up to me and she said, "Didn't you ever go to school? You know, it's detritus." Okay. Anyway, stable soil, organic matter is referred to as humus, and I'm sure you've seen humus. Now, here is what we call a soil food web. And this is something that I thought was, I like to look at. First of all, we have organic debris falling from the trees or rotting the logs or whatever. I'm just talking about outdoors, or you can do it in compost. On this side, you have actinomycetes. Actinomycetes are one-celled animals similar to bacteria. The actinomycetes have interesting properties. Actinomycetes live in the soil, and some species of actinomycetes can be absorbed through the skin. And when it's absorbed through the skin, it gets into your bloodstream, goes to your brain, and releases serotonin into your bloodstream. And now, I'm going to make a joke and say that gardeners are always smiling because they're high on serotonin, but it's actually true. I mean, this has been proven now. So we have actinomycetes working on this. We have earthworms who are breaking this down. Charles Darwin, before he wrote the book Origin of Species, wrote a book called Earthworms. And what he would do is he would go out in the daytime and he'd find, earthworms make up and down vertical holes. Yeah, I'll get it. Right. Vertical holes, and he'd put little bits of leaves at each hole. And then he'd go at night with a lantern and watch these earthworms come up from the hole, take that little bit of leaf and drag it back down into the hole. Well, it's an interesting process because what the process is that leaf is getting eaten, that little tiny bit of leaf going through that earthworm's gut, and then it's being inoculated with the bacteria in that earthworm, and then when it's ejected out into the soil, it becomes good soil. So that's one of the things that happens. Then we have fungi, which I'm going to talk about because there's all kinds of different fungi in the soil. Bacteria, who are further breaking this down, but they're also taking nutrients from the soil, from the rock elements, the minerals. Springtails, and then you have larger animals, then you have the larger animals. And then over here you have detritus eaters, and also you have predators. So we have a whole lot of things, but it's a jungle. Yeah. It's a jungle. So you have all of these creatures in the soil that are doing all kinds of different things in order to live. And these creatures, the bacteria is being eaten by the protozoa and the roundworms. The fungi, beetles and mites and springtails are going to work on those things, and then these other animals will come in and do that, eat those little things. So they're always procreating, dying, being eaten, being ejected, the waste is being ejected back into the soil. So you have this continuous thing. And if you think there's not a lot of bacteria in the soil, there's more bacteria in the soil on this planet than there is stars in the whole universe. So, anyway, detrivores. We're going to talk about detrivores. Those are the things that eat detritus. Got that right? So earthworms do soil aeration, soil structure, nutrient cycling, water movement, and plant growth. That's what they're for. If you have earthworms in your soil, you have good soil, because they're at the head of it. Millipedes, also a detrivore. Springtails, you've seen these little white things. If you have compost, you've seen them. They're tiny, tiny little white things. They improve the soil structure. They make nutrients available to the plants. And you've seen pill bugs and sow bugs. Those are also detritus eaters. And
Is there a difference?
I'm sorry?
Is there a difference between them?
There is.
I see the tail, yes.
Yeah, this is a sow bug.
That's the sow bug.
This is a pill bug. Pill bugs can roll up completely into a ball. But this little tail right here prevents sow bugs
They
from
can-
rolling
they
up.
can-
They can't go all the way.
They can, if they try to.
They try to, yeah.
Okay, when I was a kid, I always thought they were the same.
Now we have predators. And just like in the African savanna, I mean, you have predators. You don't have as many predators as you have wildebeests. I mean, there are millions of wildebeests and a couple of prides of lions, but they don't need to have that many predators to keep the populations in check. So we have protozoa and amoebas and hydra and everything else eating the bacteria, helping to distribute those nutrients again. They're being distributed through the soil. We have predatory mites. You can't see them. They are very, very tiny. We have nematodes. Now there are predator nematodes, and there are nematodes that attack the roots of plants. You want predator nematodes. You don't want the ones that go and mess up your tomatoes. They help distribute the bacteria to fungi along the soil and roots. Microscopic spiders. These are tiny little spiders. They're microscopic, and that's one of them. I don't think you have to worry about them biting you. Pseudoscorpions. You can see the size of a pseudoscorpion there. Centipedes and ants. People ask me, I got ants in my compost. What do I do? I said, what I usually do is just leave them in there, because they're part of that chain of eating things and dying and all that whole process. And then when I'm ready to use my compost, I just take a shovel and throw the ants over the fence into my neighbor's yard. I don't have to worry about it. I do that with snakes too, Okay, now I want to talk about soil microbes. This is what I find really interesting. And I'm going to talk about this for a minute. The massive degradation of our planet's ecosystem is leading to cascading losses of biodiversity, driving up extinction rates and even disease rates to us. And several things are causing that. The community of bacteria present in the soil, and this is one of the things I want to talk about, in land that has been cleared and used for 100 years was restored to its natural state in 8 years after revegetating with native plants. 100 years, 8 years. That's amazing to me. This is all taken from research data. And now we have bacteria, soil bacteria. Interesting, they change the soil environment so that plant species can exist and proliferate. These bacteria have evolved and adapted to the plants. So the native plants in this ecoregion, for instance, have the microbes have adapted to the native plants in this ecoregion. And what happens is when we bring invasive plants in and build roads and shopping centers and all that stuff, then what we've done is just destroyed that whole ecosystem, and that's continuing. So we have to. I'm saying that because it's important because of what's coming next. They recycle nitrogen, carbon, phosphorus, and other nutrients. This is from Dr. Martin Breed. They've been doing some really, really interesting stuff in Australia. So he says, we urge restoration ecologists to include microbes in their studies and reporting to landowners and policy owners to more accurately map ecosystems' responses to revegetation efforts. Because there hasn't been a lot of study on revegetation, particularly for native plants. There has not been much. There are a few scientists in the world that are doing this right now, and it's really interesting. And that's the fungal part is very interesting. Fungi. Okay. There is a fungus among us that
I like that.
lives in the soil, and it's called mycorrhizal fungi. And it has an interesting adaptation. What it can do is, let's say you have a line of trees say you have a line of 10 trees. Well, mycorrhizal fungi will colonate all of them. It'll come in, it's in the soil, it'll colonate every one of those trees, colonize. But this tree over here has very few nutrients. There's no nutrients in the soil. There's plenty over here. So the mycorrhizal fungi, which will connect all these trees, will bypass those trees that have nutrients and bring it to this tree. And I have the name of the guy who discovered that. He's an apple farmer in New Hampshire. And he's also a soil scientist, and he's been doing research on this, and that's one of the things he discovered. And so scientists are now studying the process. I mean, it's not that the mycorrhizal fungi is smart, it doesn't have a mind, but there are chemical reactions that cause that process to do. And nobody knew about that until just recently. So it's an interesting situation. So mycorrhizal fungi collects nutrients from the soil, mostly from the bacteria. The bacteria is dissolving the minerals in the soil, and then the mycorrhizal fungi takes those minerals, brings it to the plant, and exchanges for carbohydrates. It's a symbiotic relationship. Now you have mycorrhizal fungi and ecto. And the one I'm going to talk about is endo. Endo means that they have penetrated, the fungi has penetrated the plant root. And that way it makes the exchange much easier than it would otherwise. But they also act as extensions of the root system. I have a picture of that in a minute. This is what one looks like under a microscope. Actually, it's an electron microscope. And this is native arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. This is different, okay? Because this is what makes native plants competitive in an invasive plant environment. This particular type of fungi, and arbuscular means it's endo. It actually goes into the root of the plant, and it's easy to exchange, like a pipeline, and go straight in there. So here's a plant, it's a little pine tree. Now, I'm going to point to this. This structure, these three structures here are the roots. All of this white stuff out here is mycorrhizal fungi. When that tree gets big, that fungi is going to be 40, 50 feet long. And so a long-term ecosystem relies not only on replanting, but also on the recovery of the underlying soil diversity. That's because we've destroyed so much and disturbed so much soil. I have some figures on that too. This is Dr. Breed. Robust long-term ecosystems restoration relies not just on replanting native vegetation, but on the recovery of underlying soil diversity, biodiversity. That means we want to have that soil biodiversity. which we don't have. I mean, even even in compost, if I go buy organic compost, it does not have all that. There are some ways to do that, especially with arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. And people say, well, I'm going to go buy some mycorrhizal fungi, put it in my garden. It might work in your vegetable garden, but it won't work on native plants because they are specialized. So bacteria in any garden, in a teaspoon of garden soil, you could have 100 million to a billion of bacteria, and in the prairies and in the forest. And interestingly, the prairies are really what we're looking at for native plants, because that's where most of our native plants come from. The rest are in forests, and that's trees. Fungi, several yards in gardens, tens to 100s of yards, hundreds of yards in a prairie, and 1 to 40 miles in a forest. 40 miles of microscopic mycorrhizal fungi. That's one of the things we tell people: don't till. Don't till, because you till, you break up the fibers of that mycorrhizal fungi, and then they die, and then you don't have it anymore in the soil. In protozoa, thousands, 100,000s. 1 teaspoon of soil.
1 teaspoon.
Yeah, think about that. 1 teaspoon of soil. So, if it's good soil, if you have all the elements. This is not very long, by the way. So, what are we? Oh, okay. Now I want to talk about the vast disturbing disturbance of our ecosystems and why that happens. Currently, this is current, we have 70% of our ecosystem, all the Earth's landmass, has been either disturbed or modified by humans. 70%. By 2050, we're looking at 90%. We just turned 8 billion people on this planet. So we're looking at 90% in 30 years. I won't be around. Well, I might. Terry will be here. 100 and what?
Yeah, about 107.
Okay, I'll try to beat you there.
Okay.
Anyway, I thought this was just staggering. What this means is that, I mean, we have already destroyed or somehow affected the soil in 70% of all the land on Earth. It boggles my mind. So let's talk about this particular fungus, native arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, NAMF. What NAMF does is significantly improves the soil attributes, mainly because if it's in a native soil, it's going to be symbiotic with all the other organisms in that soil. It increases above and below ground diversity, significantly improves tree and shrub seedling survival, growth and establishment on moisture and nutrient stressed soil, drives plant succession, and it can prevent, I can't get too close, can prevent invasion by alien species. And they're studying this now. They're pretty sure they have a grip on this. Scientists think they have a grip on this, and that I mean, these two last things are all of them are extremely important, particularly when we have this influx of invasive plants and non-natives, and also because we have all these other things: roads, hospitals, parking lots, shopping centers, whatever. I remember driving on 99 when there was nothing on the road. Now every exit's got a shopping center on it. It's a shame. Okay, arbuscular fungi.
I know what does that.
Are found in some of the first land plants I mentioned that grew 300 million years ago. Native plants rely on native arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi to collect and deliver phosphorus and other nutrients that in exchange for carbohydrates in the plant. This is really necessary. And it's interesting because I said before, you can't just go buy mycorrhizal, I mean, you can buy it, but the mycorrhizal fungi that you get commercially is not the mycorrhizal fungi that you want to put in your native plant areas. What you want is this arbuscular. And how do we get that? How do we get arbuscular? Oh, I wanted to mention this. I was hoping Kathy would be watching. Invasive plants can change the soil biome. They disrupt mutual associations between natives and invasives, but they also alter the way soil nutrients are distributed. That blew my mind too. They introduce plant pathogens, but most importantly, they can change the soil food web. And once that soil food web is changed, you take one element out of it, it's no longer a web. So climate change is also a factor. We're seeing, in addition to the 70%, we're also seeing that climate change is going to be a contributing factor in the loss of native plant habitats totally into the future. And unless we do something about it, I don't know that it might be too late. And the microbes that are necessary for native plants to proliferate. And we can see why. I'm almost finished. Okay. Now, the only way to get arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, native arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi, is to take it from an existing, established native plant area. And because the soil, that's the soil you want. So Rodale has developed a recipe for that. You can go to Rodale's book. You can go to Teaming with Fungi too, Jeff Lowenfeld's book. You can go to either of those books, and they have recipes in there on how to get your soil in line with the native plant areas that have already been established and have been there for a while. So that's, I think, they're not complicated, but they take a little while to do. But once you've established it, you've established all these communities of that arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi. It's going to stay in that soil, and it's going to benefit your native plants. Greenhouse recipe is also in Teaming with Fungi. I would suggest, how many of you read Teaming with Microbes? 2. How many have read Teaming with Fungi? You guys gotta read that. Man, those are good books. Huh? Well, these two are written for lay people, so I can read them. I
Sounds
mean,
like fungus porn to me.
right. There are no pictures in it. I can't understand why. This is the guy, Charles Green, who wrote Mycorrhizal Planet, and he's the guy that discovered the thing about the connecting of mycorrhizal fungi from a long string of trees, where you can figure in a forest it might be 40 miles to one tree. Well, there's more trees than, there's a lot of trees between here and 40 miles from here. So all of those are connected by mycorrhizal fungi. Native Texas plants, I'm sure you've all seen this, Wisconsin and Wisconsin. And this is a Texas landscape project, which I stole from Terry. This is an interesting book too, and it talks about ecology in Texas. I am finished. That was short and brief, so you can go home early, but any questions?
Let's see, I went out and into what looked like might be native plant area, dug up a few and stuck them in my garden. Now, will it spread?
Yes.
It may, yeah, it may.
So I may
But
have
what you
some,
really have to do is actually inoculate the soil. Just putting a few plants in is not gonna inoculate the soil.
I'm kind of wanting to grow it 10 feet a year or something.
Stretch it out. The Rodale method is fairly simple. I mean, you do have to take samples. You have to take soil from the native plants. What they suggest is take the plant with soil in it and put it in a more soil in a pot, and let that develop. And then put it in a bigger pot and let that develop, and then put it in your soil.
Okay.
So you have it well
I did
established.
put a good clump of dirt in there.
So, so Bob, you couldn't just take like soil plugs and then put them in your,
I imagine
Spread
you
'em out.
could. I imagine you could. I
Little
don't.
holes.
yeah, just little plugs and pull them out.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're not taking the plants down.
Take your hole digger and go.
Yeah.
And take one and get another spot.
Don't wear those weird shoes because they.
So the arbuscular
I knew you were going to ask
fungi
me a question.
have to have a connection with the plant.
Okay.
They,
okay.
their job in the soil is multiplied times 10. They're in the family glomerulomycota.
It's easy for you to
The
say.
hyphae is what looks like roots on a fungus. The hyphae are coated with a sticky substance called glomalin. And as they grow their hyphae through the soil, that sticky substance causes all the different elements that Bob talked about in the soil to, and the word is glom together.
Mhm.
So they stick together, and so as the hyphae goes through, what it does is it leaves openings in the soil for both oxygen and water to move more readily. But then as the fungus grows into the roots to the cellular level, that's where they form the arbuscules, which are those little nodes where the exchange of what the fungus is bringing to the plant and what the plant is bringing to the fungus happen is within those little arbuscules, those little nodules. This fungus is very active at locating likely suspects like springtails that it can literally dissolve into a liquid and absorb through the hyphae, through the outer layer of the hyphae at the tip, those nutrients, and it carries them back to the tree. Hey tree, I've got some nitrogen from these insects that are dead in the soil. You want it? And the tree says, oh yeah. And here I've got some excess sugars and starches. You want it? So, but that exchange happens at the cellular level within the roots. So it's
Such a. It's,
So the-
it's
for
almost
the-
So you
miraculous.
have to have
for
the
the
plant.
fungus to proliferate, it has to have a connection with plants.
Right.
But, given enough time, it can spread.
Right.
And there are other fungi that are decomposing the organic matter, the dead insects, the dead plants, the dead leaves. There are other fungi that are decomposers, and the arbuscular ones are picking up those nutrients too, that as those things like nitrogen pass through the body of the soil insects, is how it breaks down into a form that's bioavailable to the tree to take up. Otherwise, as Bob said, the tree has no way to take it
I
up.
was
So
wondering, my plants look healthy, so I was wondering, okay, are they doing all right? Or are
If they look healthy and they're living, and they're propagating,
They do that.
I mean, if they're propagating, then you're doing right. I mean, if they're making seeds or.
I've read something from John Ferguson. He had said, don't ever put fungicide out because you'll kill everything. And
Right, yeah.
shut
Don't
it
ever
down.
put pesticides out, don't ever.
Yeah,
do
well, I
anything.
don't do that either. Because I like the bugs. But
Are there soil tests that give you broad measures of the microbial health of your soil?
I know you can get it from Texas A&M, but it's pretty expensive. Farmers do it, but there's a special form you have to fill out, and it won't come in the normal soil test sample. But the farmers have it, and it's rather expensive. I don't know, several $100 to get the soil test. So,
So with these fungi, are they more specific, say, to flowering wildflowers, or do they work with trees and shrubs?
there are different
Are there different
species.
species of these that?
They love Forbes. I mean, not the magazine, but.
Good one.
And then But they, yeah, the different species, but they're, what is the word I want, in a prairie, for instance.
Right.
There are gonna be some specialized, arbuscular fungi. But what is happening is a lot of them are in the same plants, serve the same plants in that meadow, so, yeah. Am I right, Terry? I warned her. Because I know she likes mushrooms,
Yeah.
and as I'm afraid she'd bring me some that were, hallucinogenic, and I would, not know what I'm talking about. Well, I don't know what I'm talking about yet.
So what you're saying, everybody said, let's form a pocket prairie.
Yeah.
So if you get plants from, let's say, Mercer, we've grown them, and we've always, they're not gonna have that
No, you won't.
that fungi in there, is it?
No, it won't.
So,
You'll have fungi,
yeah, but you
but
won't
you
have
won't have
these
that.
that really enhance
Right.
the growth and
Unless they've inoculated it in some way.
Yeah.
So,
We see that, they have soil that they sell that has that in it, but
Yeah.
like you say, probably not the right ones.
if it's gotta be that arbuscular, the
wow.
glum or whatever.
Mycorrhizal.
Hail to thee, Macbeth, thou shalt be fain of glums.
The glommers.
It'd be nice if they incorporate a little bit of it in the seeds. Then
Oh.
They do that in soybeans, I
Do they have,
There are certain pines in the alpine forest who do incorporate the fungi into their seeds.
so when
the
they
seeds drop.
growing, they've already got their,
Yes.
next.
Interesting,
Wow.
wow,
Very sophisticated.
that's so cool.
Your slide you showed on bacteria and fungi
Uh-huh.
in the different environments. So on one part it said 100,000. Is that the same bacteria or is it different species?
It's probably different species, it depends on what species or what,
Which
the
environment?
prevalent species
Okay.
for that.
The prairie or whichever.
Well,
Okay.
we found, the scientists have found that that the bacteria, there are bacteria out there who are non-discriminate. They will serve native plants or non-native, but, and microbes, any kind of microbes. But, arbuscular fungi is particular to native plants, native forests. Let's say, now, they have arbuscular fungi for other plants, a lot of them have other plants, but they've tried it with planting invasive species or non-native species with native plants, and the native species did much better than the invasive plants or the non-natives, because that arbuscular fungi has actually evolved and adapted with those native plants. So, they're specialized in a lot of things.
So any idea of how many species of fungi we're being
200. There's 200 species
200
of
total
the
fungi.
arbuscular fungi. They know about.
Oh,
They
okay.
think there might be
Probably more.
thousands,
And
but
bacteria as
they've
well,
only identified 200.
in a teaspoon of soil. In a native
That's amazing,
flower bed or, interesting.
very interesting.
Is that everything?
Somewhat related to this, I think it's related to this, I read a study in New Zealand about native plant colonies versus non-native plant colonies and how quickly do they give up CO2 back to the atmosphere, right? And non-native colonies were giving it up 2 to 3 times faster than
Yes.
native colonies, and they think it's all the stuff that's happening underground, that's the fungi and all this interactions underground.
Sure, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And New Zealand and Australia are doing a lot of work on that. Their scientists are doing some real interesting studies on all of that. So, I knew you would ask me.
So, all of the soil organisms exactly what you said, all of the soil organisms in any ecosystem have co-evolved for eons, not just millennia, eons, with that suite of native plants. That's how they developed the relationships.
That's right.
So when you bring in something that's not from that ecosystem, something new, exactly what you said is right. As everything that takes in food has to give off waste, everything.
That's right.
And the way plants and trees give off waste is through the root system.
Right.
So when the non-natives are introduced, they are introducing chemicals into the soil that the soil organisms have no relationship with.
Right, yeah.
They are dropping leaves that there are no decomposers in that community that can decompose. They can't use that for food.
Right.
And further than that, they're damaging the ecosystem in the fact that because of so little to no competition like native plants have, they're growing faster, they're putting on more leaf mass, so evapotranspiration alone is sucking way more, up to 250 times more water out of the soil through evapotranspiration,
Yeah.
through those invasive plants than the natives who know how to hold on to their water and release it at a rate that they can all do well.
And even our early settlers knew about that. I mean, the plains were some of the richest soil on the planet. And that's why, because they were, native plants and they had all that symbiosis going on in the soil.
So as the non-native invasives begin to proliferate in an ecosystem, what happens is the decomposing communities begin to fall out. The other soil organisms, the bacteria, the fungi, they have no relationship with these new plants and they begin to fall out. And even the natives that are left then suffer from lack of water, lack of nutrients,
Right, and they
lack
won't be as
of
healthy.
microbes to help them get those.
They want fruit as well, a lot of unfertilized seeds. I mean, it's gonna be,
Does that sort of explain why the Chinese tallow is so effective?
Well, the
And the
Chinese,
eucalyptus tree?
the Chinese tallow, like other nut trees, when it exudes waste into the soil, it's putting a chemical that inhibits the growth of anything else around it.
Kind of like a
So-
walnut tree.
So it's
It's a
killing,
natural herbicide
it's
then,
killing off the natives that are there. In 2005, there was a study made by HJC and Park, both were collaborators in it with the Forest Service. And they did a study of what they call the regional forest. It's all this 13 counties that's in the HJC region. They use something that I'm sure you would understand that I don't, some sort of sensing thing that can read the chemical signals of the box from the different trees and identify to family, if not species, what kind of trees there were. In 2005, when they did that study, 19% of all the trees in this region were Chinese tallow.
Wow.
But when they isolated to just from the downtown, the south side of downtown Houston to the coast at Freeport, 80% of all the trees were Chinese tallow.
It was all prairie at one time,
yeah.
and then they took it over,
And they take it over.
And people like my dad planting, trees in our yard, that was,
Yeah,
And all nut trees do that to a degree. That's
Yeah.
why when you're out there in the forest, you come across a whole little grove of water hickory or something like that, or,
right,
it's a little patch.
not much growing near the big old
Yeah.
black walnut.
right.
But because they are, everything in that ecosystem is adapted to live together,
Right.
it's not as dramatic as
Right.
invasives
No.
who don't have controls.
In Louisiana, the prevalent, the main tree for the state was the loblolly pine. Okay, that was the prevalent tree. Now it's Chinese tallow
Oh,
as the prevalent tree
that's so
in the
sad.
state. Yeah.
Very sad.
Invasives are bad.
And also, Chinese tallow has a lot of berries, a lot of nuts, and they drop them everywhere. And that's the other thing. I mean, you look along fence lines in farming areas, and you can see them growing along the fence lines.
Not
And
in
the
North
birds.
Texas.
Yeah.
Not in North Texas, there are no trees growing to fence lines. They farm wall to wall, roadside.
And there's no spaces.
Fence to fence.
There is no fence,
Yeah.
You go right through the
no
road,
fence at all. They just round up it
yeah,
and then plant it.
true.
that's why we don't have.
Never go
roads.
coming.
And if any bugs get in it, the aerial spray it.
Right, we'll kill it until,
There are
we're
no
gonna kill it till we
pollen.
kill it, you know?
No pollen.
I mean, that's why they have to fertilize every year, because it kills off all the bacteria,
I love it.
you know?
Yeah. She's got some challenge plans for us.
How much I should do?
Thanks, Bob.
Very great program, yes. I was thinking about fungi.
So,
Yeah.
I had the privilege of going to Don's garden recently, and it is full of butterflies and pollinators
Not today.
on the highest flower. And Don showed me the distinctive